Today we're going to be talking about State Question 844, which is on your August 25th ballot. I want to start by providing some context and history so that we can better understand what the state question is actually going to change. So firstly, there's the concept of property taxes, which I'm sure most of you all are familiar with. But there's another term called ad valorem, which is used interchangeably to mean property taxes. So if I say ad valorem, just think property taxes. Another thing that I want to introduce is the 5-year manufacturing ad valorem exemption. This is a program that allows companies from a variety of industries to claim a 5-year exemption on property taxes if they meet the eligibility criteria. This means that they can go 5 years without paying property taxes if they meet the eligibility criteria. And that criteria is that they must be a new acquired or expanded facility in the state of Oklahoma, and 2, that they meet the minimum capital investment into the state and maintain specific payroll and employment conditions. Now, companies cannot claim the 5-year manufacturing exemption on property that has already been exempted previously. So this 5-year ad valorem manufacturing exemption has been around since the 1980s. The origins of this program lie in the economic conditions that we saw in the late 70s, early 80s. Stagflation was prevalent, which is the idea of high inflation and high unemployment. There was the Iranian Revolution of 1979 that shocked the oil markets and prices for oil and gas went up. And under these economic conditions, even the state of Oklahoma was feeling the impacts. And so lawmakers in Oklahoma wanted to do something to mitigate this economic downturn. And so they introduced this 5-year ad valorem exemption for manufacturers with the hope that this incentive would bring manufacturing facilities and other companies to Oklahoma and set up shop here and increase job availability. This was done with State Question 588 in 1985. And people voted to create this 5-year ad valorem exemption program. But there was one problem with this idea that lawmakers recognized. If companies were able to not pay their property taxes for 5 years at a time, that would be bad for local economies. Why? That's because a lot of our local services, like public schools, libraries, ambulance services, emergency management, sheriff departments, and counties heavily rely on property taxes as their main source of revenue. So with this exemption in place, all those local services would lose a lot of their revenue. Lawmakers knew that that would be detrimental to those local services. So in order to ensure that local services and local governments got the revenue that they would have gotten without this exemption, the legislature decided that the state government and really taxpayers would reimburse local entities the revenue that they weren't getting from those companies. So the legislature did this by taking 1% of all the income tax that is collected by the state. They put that 1% of income tax revenue into a fund, and they called that fund the Ad Valorem Reimbursement Fund. I need you to remember that. Ad Valorem Reimbursement Fund, which is just a property tax reimbursement fund, right? And they use that money to pay local entities the amount of property taxes the company is getting an exemption for. So State Question 588 not only created that 5-year manufacturing exemption that I talked about earlier, but also this ad valorem reimbursement fund. So the ad valorem reimbursement fund ensures that counties and local entities don't lose massive ad valorem revenue simply because the state wants to give companies a 5-year exemption on their property taxes. So 1987 was the first year that the ad valorem reimbursement fund was used. And since 1987, taxpayers have been subsidizing companies. Since 1987 all the way to 2025, the state has spent about $2.8 billion adjusted for inflation, reimbursing counties and schools for money that companies would otherwise have paid. So let's get to State Question 844. Firstly, let me say that State Question 844 has nothing to do with that 5-year ad valorem exemption that I talked about. This state question doesn't change that program. Companies will still be able to get the 5-year property tax exemption if they qualify, regardless of if State Question 844 passes or not. State Question 844 deals entirely with that ad valorem reimbursement fund. So what it asks is, State Question 844 asks voters to give the legislature the full authority to change the methodology of how those reimbursements for localities are calculated. This means the people are voting to give the legislature full authority to change this part of our state's constitution, but the legislature doesn't give any details or guidelines on how they will change the law. There are some concerns with this state question. Some that are opposed to this state question worry that this would allow the legislature to pick and choose which counties and localities get reimbursed or not. On the other hand, supporters of this state question say that the methodology needs to be reviewed and changed so that there is more fairness. And this stems from the fact that currently one county receives approximately 40% of all the money in the reimbursement fund, leaving the remaining 60% to be split between the other 41 counties. Now, this is not because that one county is being given preferential treatment. It's because that one county has a company that is taking that much exemption in property taxes, and that is what the county is owed. Supporters of the state question say that amending the methodology would ensure that no individual county receives a reimbursement in the amount detrimental to other counties. That's what the state question ballot title includes. However, that single county that receives 40% of the reimbursement fund has as much a right to being reimbursed as the other 41 counties. The state allows manufacturers to be exempted from paying property taxes for 5 years, and counties and localities are just following the law by asking the state to reimburse them for that lost revenue. The larger question here is, what's wrong with our current methodology of reimbursement? The way it works currently is the county submits a claim for reimbursement to the Oklahoma Tax Commission. Then the Oklahoma Tax Commission verifies the claim to make sure it's legitimate, and if it is, it allows the transaction to take place and disperses that money to the county treasurer, who then disperses it to the local entities. If something specific does need to change in the methodology, the legislature could have described that in detail in the state question, rather than asking for a blank check of authority to change the Constitution in this part however they please. Additionally, since the Oklahoma Tax Commission is in charge of verifying the claims, perhaps some of the changes needed can come from the Oklahoma Tax Commission, improving its verification process and oversight of assessment procedures. That would not need to be a constitutional change. I hope that helps you understand the state question better, and I hope that helps you feel more confident when you cast your ballot on August 25th.